Chapter 3, Knights of the Table Round. Here's Merlin. Mainly, the round table talk was monologues, narrative accounts of the adventures in which these prisoners were captured and their friends and backers killed and stripped of their steeds and armor. As a general thing, as far as I could make out, these murderous adventures were not forays undertaken to avenge injuries, nor to settle old disputes or sudden fallings out. No, as a rule, they were simply duels between strangers, duels between people who had never even been introduced to each other, and between whom existed no cause of offense whatever. Many a time I had seen a couple of boys, strangers, meet by chance and say simultaneously, "I can lick you," and go at it on the spot. But I had always imagined until now that that sort of thing belonged to children only and was a sign and mark of childhood. But here were these big boobies sticking to it and taking pride in it to clear up into full age and beyond. Yet there was something very engaging about these great, simple-hearted creatures, something attractive and lovable. There did not seem to be brains enough in the entire nurseries, so to speak, to bait a fishhook with, but you didn't seem to mind that after a little, because you soon saw that brains were not needed in a society like that, and indeed would have marred it, hindered it, spoiled its symmetry, perhaps rendered its existence impossible. There was a fine manliness observable in almost every face, and in some a certain loftiness and sweetness that rebuked your belittling criticisms and stilled them. A most noble benignity and purity reposed in the countenance of him they called Sir Galahad, and likewise in the king's also. And there was majesty and greatness in the giant frame and high bearing of Sir Lancelot of the Lake. There was presently an incident which centered the general interest upon this Sir Lancelot. At a sign from a sort of master of ceremonies, 6 or 8 of the prisoners rose and came forward in a body and knelt on the floor and lifted up their hands toward the ladies' gallery and begged the grace of a word with the queen. The most conspicuously situated lady in that massed flower bed of feminine show and finery inclined her head by way of assent, and then the spokesman of the prisoners delivered himself and his followers into her hands for free pardon, ransom, captivity, or death, as she in her good pleasure might elect. And this, as he said, he was doing by command of Sir Kay the Seneschal, whose prisoners they were, he having vanquished them by his single might and prowess and sturdy conflict in the field. Surprise and astonishment flashed from face to face all over the house. The queen's gratified smile faded out at the name of Sir Kay, and she looked disappointed. And the page whispered in my ear with an accent and manner expressive of extravagant derision, "Sir Kay, forsooth! Oh, call me pet names, dearest, call me a marine. In twice 1,000 years shall the unholy invention of man labor at odds, beget the fellow to this majestic lie." Every eye was fastened with severe inquiry upon Sir Kay, but he was equal to the occasion. He got up and played his hand like a major and took every trick. He said he would state the case exactly according to the facts. He would tell the simple, straightforward tale without comment of his own. "And then," said he, "if ye find glory and honor due, ye will give it unto him who is the mightiest man of his hands that ever bare shield, or strake with sword in the ranks of Christian battle, even him that sitteth there." And he pointed to Sir Lancelot. Ah, he fetched them. It was a rattling good stroke. Then he went on and told how Sir Lancelot, seeking adventures, some brief time gone by, killed 7 giants at one sweep of his sword, and set 142 captive maidens free, and then went further, still seeking adventures, and found him, Sir Kay, fighting a desperate fight against 9 foreign knights, and straightway took the battle solely into his own hands and conquered the 9. And that night Sir Lancelot rose quietly and dressed him in Sir Kay's armor, and took Sir Kay's horse, and gat him away into distant lands, and vanquished 16 knights in one pitched battle, and 34 in another. And all these and the former 9 he made to swear that about Whitsuntide they would ride to Arthur's court and yield them to Queen Guinevere's hands as captives of Sir Kay the Seneschal, spoil of his knightly prowess. And now here were these 6 and the rest would be along as soon as they might be healed of their desperate wounds. Well, it was touching to see the queen blush and smile and look embarrassed and happy, and fling furtive glances at Sir Lancelot that would have got him shot in Arkansas to a dead certainty. Everybody praised the valor and magnanimity of Sir Lancelot, and as for me, I was perfectly amazed that one man all by himself should have been able to beat down and capture such battalions of practiced fighters. I said as much to Clarence, but this mocking featherhead only said, and Sir Kay had had time to get another skin of sour wine into him. Ye had seen the accompt doubled. I looked at the boy in sorrow, and as I looked, I saw the cloud of a deep despondency settle upon his countenance. I followed the direction of his eye and saw that a very old and white-bearded man, clothed in a flowing black gown, had risen and was standing at the table upon unsteady legs, and feebly swaying his ancient head and surveying the company with his watery and wandering eye. The same suffering look that was in the page's face was observable in all the faces around, the look of dumb creatures who know that they must endure and make no moan. Marry, we shall have it again, sighed the boy. That same old weary tale that he hath told 1,000 times in the same words, and that he will tell till he dieth. Every time he hath gotten his barrel full, and feeleth his exaggeration mill a working. Would God I had died, or I saw this day. Who is it? Merlin, the mighty liar and magician. Perdition singe him for the weariness he worketh with his own tale. But that men fear him, for that he hath the storms and the lightnings and all the devils that be in hell at his beck and call. They would have dug his entrails out these many years ago to get at that tale and squelch it. He telleth it always in the third person, making believe he is too modest to glorify himself. Maledictions light upon him, misfortune be his dole. Good friend, prithee call me for evensong. The boy nestled himself upon my shoulder and pretended to go to sleep. The old man began his tale, and presently the lad was asleep in reality. So also were the dogs, and the court, the lackeys, and the files of men at arms. The droning voice droned on. A soft snoring arose on all sides and supported it like a deep and subdued accompaniment of wind instruments. Some heads were bowed upon folded arms. Some lay back with open mouths that issued unconscious music. The flies buzzed a bit, unmolested. The rats swarmed softly out from 100 holes and pattered about and made themselves at home everywhere. And one of them sat up like a squirrel on the king's head and held a bit of cheese in its hands and nibbled it and dribbled the crumbs in the king's face with naive and impudent irreverence. It was a tranquil scene, and restful to the weary eye and the jaded spirit. This was the old man's tale, he said. Right so the king and Merlin departed, and went until a hermit that was a good man and a great leech. So the hermit searched all his wounds and gave him good salves. So the king was there 3 days, and then were his wounds well amended, that he might ride and go, and so departed. And as they rode, Arthur said, I have no sword, no force, said Merlin. Hereby is a sword that shall be yours, and I may. So they rode till they came to a lake, the which was a fair water and broad. And in the midst of the lake, Arthur was ware of an arm clothed in white samite, that held a fair sword in that hand. Lo, said Merlin, yonder is that sword that I spake of. With that they saw a damsel going upon the lake. What damsel is that? Said Arthur. That is the lady of the lake, said Merlin, and within that lake is a rock, and therein is as fair a place as any on earth, and richly beseen, and this damsel will come to you anon, and then speak ye fair to her, that she will give you that sword. Anon, withal came the damsel unto Arthur, and saluted him, and he her again. Damsel, said Arthur, what sword is that, that yonder the arm holdeth above the water? I would it were mine, for I have no sword. Sir King Arthur, said the damsel, that sword is mine, and if ye will give me a gift when I ask it of you, ye shall have it. By my faith, said Arthur, I will give you what gift ye will ask. Well, said the damsel, go ye into yonder barge, and row yourself to the sword, and take it and the scabbard with you, and I will ask my gift when I see my time. So Sir Arthur and Merlin alight and tied their horses to 2 trees, and so they went into the ship. And when they came to the sword that the hand held, Sir Arthur took it up by the handles and took it with him. And the arm and the hand went under the water, and so they came unto the land and rode forth. And then Sir Arthur saw a rich pavilion. What signifieth yonder pavilion? It is the knight's pavilion, said Merlin, that ye fought with last, Sir Pellinore. But he is out, he is not there. He hath ado with a knight of yours, that hight Eglaim, and they have fought together, but at the last Eglaim fled, and else he had been dead, and he hath chased him even to Carlion, and we shall meet with him anon in the highway. That is well said, said Arthur. Now have I a sword, now will I wage battle with him and be avenged on him. Sir, ye shall not so, said Merlin, for the knight is aweary of fighting and chasing, so that ye shall have no warship to have ado with him. Also, he will not lightly be matched of one knight living, and therefore it is my counsel, let him pass. For he shall do you good service in short time, and his sons after his days. Also ye shall see that day in short space ye shall be right glad to give him your sister to wed. When I see him, I will do as ye advise me, said Arthur. Then Sir Arthur looked on the sword and liked it passing well. Whether liketh you better, said Merlin, the sword or the scabbard? Me liketh better the sword, said Arthur. Ye are more unwise, said Merlin, for the scabbard is worth 10 of the sword. For while ye have the scabbard upon you, ye shall never lose no blood. Be ye never so sore wounded, therefore, keep well the scabbard always with you. So they rode under the Carlion, and by the way they met with Sir Pellinore, But Merlin had done such a craft that Pellinore saw not Arthur, and he passed by without any words. I marvel, said Arthur, that the knight would not speak. Sir, said Merlin, he saw you not, for and he had seen you, ye had not lightly departed. So they came unto Carlion, whereof his knights were passing glad. And when they heard of his adventures, they marveled that he would jeopard his person so alone. But all men of worship said it was merry to be under such a chieftain that would put his person in adventure as other poor knights did. Chapter 4, Sir Dinadan, the humorist. It seemed to me that this quaint lie was most simply and beautifully told, but then I had heard it only once, and that makes a difference. It was pleasant to the others when it was fresh, no doubt. Sir Dinadan, the humorist, was the first to awake, and he soon roused the rest with a practical joke of a sufficiently poor quality. He tied some metal mugs to a dog's tail and turned him loose, and he tore round and around the place in a frenzy of fright, with all the other dogs bellowing after him, and battering and crashing against everything that came in their way, and making altogether a chaos of confusion and a most deafening din and turmoil, at which every man and woman of the multitude laughed till the tears flowed, and some fell out of their chairs and wallowed on the floor in ecstasy. It was just like so many children. Sir Dinadan was so proud of his exploit that he could not keep from telling over and over again to weariness how the immortal idea happened to occur to him. And as is the way with humorists of his breed, he was still laughing at it after everybody else had got through. He was so set up that he concluded to make a speech, of course, a humorous speech. I think I never heard so many old played out jokes strung together in my life. He was worse than the minstrels, worse than the clowns in the circus. It seemed peculiarly sad to sit here 1,300 years before I was born and listen again to poor, flat, worm-eaten jokes that had given me the dry gripes when I was a boy 1,300 years afterwards. It about convinced me that there isn't any such thing as a new joke possible. Everybody laughed at these antiquities, but then they always do. I had noticed that centuries later. However, of course, the scoffer didn't laugh. I mean, the boy. No, he scoffed. There wasn't anything he wouldn't scoff at. He said the most of Sir Dinadan's jokes were rotten, and the rest were petrified. I said petrified was good, as I believed myself that the only right way to classify the majestic ages of some of those jokes was by the geologic periods. But that neat idea hit the boy in a blank place, for geology hadn't been invented yet. However, I made a note of the remark and calculated to educate the Commonwealth up to it if I pulled through. It is no use to throw a good thing away merely because the market isn't ripe yet. Now, Sir Kay arose and began to fire up on his history mill for me for fuel. It was time for me to feel serious, and I did. Sir Kay told how he had encountered me in a far land of barbarians who all wore the same ridiculous garb that I did, a garb that was a work of enchantment and intended to make the wearer secure from hurt by human hands. However, he had nullified the force of the enchantment by prayer and had killed my 13 knights in a 3 hours battle and taken me prisoner, sparing my life in order that so strange a curiosity as I was might be exhibited to the wonder and admiration of the king and the courts. He spoke of me all the time in the blandest ways as this prodigious giant and this horrible sky-towering monster and this tusked and taloned man-devouring ogre, And everybody took in all this bosh in the naivest way and never smiled or seemed to notice that there was any discrepancy between these watered statistics and me. He said that in trying to escape from him, I sprang into the top of a tree 200 cubits high at a single bound, but he dislodged me with a stone the size of a cow, which all to brast the most of my bones, and then swore me to appear at Arthur's court for sentence. He ended by condemning me to die at noon on the 21st, and was so little concerned about it that he stopped to yawn before he named the date. I was in a dismal state by this time, indeed. I was hardly enough in my right mind to keep the run of a dispute that sprung up as to how I had better be killed, the possibility of the killing being doubted by some because of the enchantment in my clothes. And yet it was nothing but an ordinary suit of $15 slop shops. Still, I was sane enough to notice this detail. To wit, many of the terms used in the most matter-of-fact way by this great assemblage of the first ladies and gentlemen in the land would have made a Comanche blush. Indelicacy is too mild a term to convey the idea. However, I had read Tom Jones and Roderick Random and other books of that kind, and knew that the highest and first ladies and gentlemen in England had remained little or no cleaner in their talk, and in the morals and conduct with which such talk implies, clear up to 100 years ago. In fact, clear into our own 19th century. In which century, broadly speaking, the earliest samples of the real lady and real gentleman discoverable in English history, or in European history for that matter, may be said to have made their appearance. Suppose Sir Walter, instead of putting the conversations into the mouths of his characters, had allowed the characters to speak for themselves. We should have had talk from Rebecca and Ivanhoe, and the soft lady, Rowena, which would embarrass a tramp in our day. However, to the unconsciously indelicate, all things are delicate. King Arthur's people were not aware that they were indecent, and I had presence of mind enough not to mention it. They were so troubled about my enchanted clothes that they were mightily relieved at last when old Merlin swept the difficulty away for them with a common sense hint. He asked them why they were so dull. Why didn't it occur to them to strip me? In half a minute, I was as naked as a pair of tongs. And dear, to think of it, I was the only embarrassed person there. Everybody discussed me and did it as unconcernedly as if I had been a cabbage. Queen Guinevere was as naively interested as the rest and said she had never seen anybody with legs just like mine before. It was the only compliment I got, if it was a compliment. Finally, I was carried off in one direction and my perilous clothes in another. I was shoved into a dark and narrow cell in a dungeon with some scant remnants for dinner, some moldy straw for a bed, and no end of rats for company. Chapter 5, an inspiration. I was so tired that even my fears were not able to keep me awake long. When I next came to myself, I seemed to have been asleep a very long time. My first thought was, well, what an astonishing dream I've had. I reckon I've waked only just in time to keep from being hanged or drowned or burned or something. I'll nap again till the whistle blows, and then I'll go down to the arms factory and have it out with Hercules. But just then I heard the harsh music of rusty chains and bolts. A light flashed in my eyes, and that butterfly, Clarence, stood before me. I gasped with surprise. My breath almost got away from me. What? I said. You here yet? Go along with the rest of the dream. Scatter! But he only laughed in his light-hearted way and fell to making fun of my sorry plight. All right, I said resignedly. Let the dream go on. I'm in no hurry. Prithee, what dream? What dream? Why, the dream that I am in Arthur's court, a person who never existed, and that I am talking to you, who are nothing but a work of the imagination. Oh, law, indeed. And is it a dream that you're to be burnt tomorrow? Ho, ho, answer me that. The shock that went through me was distressing. I now began to reason that my situation was in the last degree serious, dream or no dream, for I knew by past experience of the lifelike intensity of dreams that to be burned to death, even in a dream, would be very far from being a jest, and was a thing to be avoided by any means, fair or foul, that I could contrive. So I said beseechingly, Ah, Clarence, good boy, only friend I've got, for you are my friend, aren't you? Don't fail me. Help me devise some way of escaping from this place. Now, do but hear thyself. Escape? Why, man, the corridors are on guard, and keep of men at arms. No doubt, no doubt. But how many, Clarence? Not many, I hope. Fourscore. One may not hope to escape. After a pause, hesitatingly. And there be other reasons, and weightier, other ones. What are they? Well, they say, oh, but I daren't. Indeed, I daren't. Why, poor lad, what is the matter? Why do you blench? Why do you tremble so? Oh, in sooth, there is need. I do want to tell you, but come, be brave, be a man, speak out. There's a good lad. He hesitated, pulled one way by desire, the other way by fear. Then he stole to the door and peeped out, listening, and finally crept close to me and put his mouth to my ear and told me his fearful news in a whisper, and with all the cowering apprehension of one who was venturing upon awful ground and speaking of things whose very mention might be frightened with death. Merlin, and his malice, has woven a spell about this dungeon, and there bides not the man in these kingdoms that would be desperate enough to essay to cross its lines with you. Now, God pity me, I have told it. Oh, be kind to me, be merciful to a poor boy who means thee well, for an thou betray me, I am lost. I laughed the only really refreshing laugh I had had for some time, and shouted, Merlin has wrought a spell? Merlin, forsooth? That cheap old humbug, that maundering old ass? Bosh, pure bosh, the silliest bosh in the world. Why, it does seem to me that all the childish, idiotic, chuckle-headed, chicken-livered superstitions that have... Oh, damn Merlin. But Clarence had slumped to his knees before I had half finished, and he was like to go out of his mind with fright. Oh, beware! These are awful words. Any moment these walls may crumble upon us if you say such things. Oh, call them back before it's too late. Now, this strange exhibition gave me a good idea and set me to thinking. If everybody about here was so honestly and sincerely afraid of Merlin's pretended magic as Clarence was, certainly a superior man like me ought to be shrewd enough to contrive some way to take advantage of such a state of things. I went on thinking and worked out a plan. Then I said, Get up, pull yourself together, look me in the eye. Do you know why I laughed? No, but for blessed lady's sake, do it no more. Well, I'll tell you why I laughed. Because I'm a magician myself. Thou? The boy recoiled a step and caught his breath, for the thing hit him rather sudden, but the aspect which he took on was very, very respectful. I took quick note of that. It indicated that a humbug didn't need to have a reputation in this asylum. People stood ready to take him at his word. Without that, I resumed. I've known Merlin 700 years, and he 700. Don't interrupt me. He has died and come alive again 13 times and traveled under a new name every time. Smith, Jones, Robinson, Jackson, Peters, Haskins, Merlin. A new alias every time it turns up. I knew him in Egypt 300 years ago. I knew him in India 500 years ago. He's always blethering around in my way. Everywhere I go, he makes me tired. He don't amount to shucks as a magician, knows some of the old common tricks, but has never got beyond the rudiments and never will. He is well enough for the provinces, one night stands and that sort of thing, you know. But dear me, he oughtn't to set up for an expert anyway, not where there's a real artist. Now, look here, Clarence, I'm going to stand your friend right along, and in return, you must be mine. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to get word to the king that I am a magician myself and the supreme grand Haya Muckamuck and head of the tribe at that. And I want him to be made to understand that I'm just quietly arranging a little calamity here that will make the fur fly in these realms if Sir Kay's project is carried out and any harm comes to me. Will you get that to the king for me? The poor boy was in such a state that he could hardly answer me. It was pitiful to see a creature so terrified, so unnerved, so demoralized. But he promised everything, and on my side he made me promise over and over again that I would remain his friend and never turn against him or cast any enchantments upon him. Then he worked his way out, staying himself with his hand along the wall like a sick person. Presently, this thought occurred to me. How heedless I have been. When the boy gets calm, he will wonder why a great magician like me should have begged a boy like him to help me get out of this place. He will put this and that together and will see that I am a humbug. I worried over that heedless blunder for an hour and called myself a great many hard names meantime. But finally, it occurred to me all of a sudden that these animals didn't reason, that they never put this and that together, that all their talk showed that they didn't know a discrepancy when they saw it. I was at rest then. But as soon as one is at rest in this world, off he goes on something else to worry about. It occurred to me that I had made another blunder. I had sent the boy off to alarm his betters with a threat. I intending to invent a calamity at my leisure. Now, the people who are the readiest and eagerest and willingest to swallow miracles are the very ones who are the hungriest to see you perform them. Suppose I should be called on for a sample. Suppose I should be asked to name my calamity. Yes, I had made a blunder. I ought to have invented my calamity first. What shall I do? What can I say to gain a little time? I was in trouble again, in the deepest kind of trouble. There's a footstep. They're coming. If I had only just a moment to think. Good. I've got it. I'm all right. You see, it was the eclipse. It came into my mind in the nick of time how Columbus or Cortez or one of those people played an eclipse as a saving trump once on some savages, and I saw my chance. I could play it myself now, and it wouldn't be any plagiarism either, because I should get it in nearly 1,000 years ahead of those parties. Clarence came in, subdued, distressed, and said, All hasted the message to our liege the king.
and straightway he had me to his presence. He was frightened even to the marrow, and was minded to give order for your instant enlargement, and that you be clothed in fine raiment, and lodged as befitted one so great. But then came Merlin and spoiled all, for he persuaded the king that you are mad, and know not whereof you speak, and said your threat is but foolishness and idle vaporing. They disputed long, but in the end, Merlin, scoffing, said, wherefore hath he not named his brave calamity? Verily, it is because it cannot. This thrust did in a most sudden sort close the king's mouth, and he could offer not to turn the argument, and so reluctant and full loth to do you the discourtesy, he yet prayeth you to consider his perplexed case, as noting how the matter stands, and name the calamity. If so be you have determined the nature of it and the time of its coming, oh, prithee delay not. To delay at such a time were to double and treble the perils that already compass thee about. Oh, be thou wise, name the calamity.
I allowed silence to accumulate while I got my impressiveness together, and then said,
how long have I been shut up in this hole? You were shut up when yesterday was well spent. It is 9 of the morning now. No, then I have slept well, sure enough. 9 in the morning now, and yet it is the very complexion of midnight to a shade. This is the 20th, then. The 20th, yes. And I am to be burned alive tomorrow.
The boy shuddered.
At what hour? At high noon. Now then, I'll tell you what to say.
I paused and stood over that cowering lad a whole minute in awful silence. Then, in a voice deep, measured, charged with doom, I began, and rose by dramatically graded stages to my colossal climax, which I delivered in as sublime and noble a way as ever I did such a thing in my life.
Go back and tell the king that at that hour I will smother the whole world in the dead blackness of midnight. I will blot out the sun, and he shall never shine again. The fruits of the earth shall rot for lack of light and warmth, and the peoples of the earth shall famish and die to the last man.
I had to carry the boy out myself. He sunk into such a collapse. I handed him over to the soldiers and went back.